apart by like 1:10, and we want to wrap up. I need 5 minutes at the end. So we're going to get started. Lindsay, I know we have a poll up. Everybody, my name is Julia Pearson. I am the Executive Director of Cham, and I'm just going to get us quickly started. I'm so sorry for the technical delay that we had today. There was a lot of people, there seemed to have been a problem with the link, so we started a little late to give people time to sign on. If you have to get off, everything is recorded. It'll be up by Thursday, maybe even Wednesday, so you can listen to whatever you missed later. I am going to launch, I have to share my screen, so hold on. And I'm going to put the slides up. Okay. Okay, can someone confirm display duplicate slideshow? So you're just seeing the slides, correct? Okay.
I'm not seeing the slides right now.
I am seeing.
Oh, I didn't push share, guys. Okay, we're gonna get it together. Harold, could you please turn your screen off? All right. Now, guys, we're really gonna start. And we are being recorded.
Julia, do you want it to be in the screen view? You have notes. I'm
going to get started and I'll fix that in a minute, okay?
Sure.
Because I don't see the thing easily, so let me just keep going. Can you stop the share polling results for a moment? Okay, just going to go over logistics real quickly. First, we're going to use, our webinar is going to go to 1:30 because we started late. Like I said earlier, you can hear a recording for what you missed. We're going to engage you three ways today. We're going to have the Q&A section where you write the questions for anything that you have for the presenters. In chat, we're going to give you logistics. If you have ideas, if you have something to share, please, please, please throw it into chat. We will be a survey at the end that will pop up on your screen. Please go ahead and fill that out. It makes a big difference for us. And we do have a little survey in there too about future programs. And the slides are on our website right now at webinars, chamonline.org.webinars, and the recording will be there by Friday, if not sooner. So I want to take a minute to thank our sponsors. National Equity Fund and LISC are founding members of Cham. We really, without them and our other founders, we wouldn't be here today, and they have provided so much leadership. And thank you, Lisa, for being on our webinar today. And Goldstein Hall is a law firm, and again, they are very supportive and we're very involved. Brian was very involved in planning this webinar. So thank you so much to our sponsors who allow us to provide this webinar for free today. So I'm going to introduce you to Lisa. Lisa Deller is the Vice President of Asset Management in New York for the National Equity Fund and the Vice President of Cham, and has been my partner in Cham for quite a while, or I've been her partner. So Lisa, why don't you take it from here?
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. We're thrilled. Julia was recently appointed as Executive Director for Cham. So I want to just formally welcome you to the Cham family. I know you've worked with us for a long time, but being an Executive Director of this group is really a special position. And we appreciate your commitment to the growth of Cham and training and everything that you've contributed. So thank you. What is Cham? Cham is a consortium of mission-oriented owners, developers, investors, stakeholders committed to professional asset management and preservation of affordable housing. Through our education and convening programs, Cham advances financial and community building standards of excellence that help the affordable housing industry maintain the long-term strength and viability of our assets. And so Cham has a great, if you're not a Cham member, please go to cham.us and you can join Cham. And we have a great training. Cham traditionally had a course of study that was presented at NeighborWorks. And now we've pivoted to more online training. And so in collaboration with HAI Group, we have the nuts and bolts of asset management online. We're doing this whole series of webinars. And so we'll wrap up later and talk more about that. But for now, what I want to do is I want to introduce you to our presenters today. Brian Hsu is a very special person who I've worked with for at least 15 years now. So, and Brian and I have done a lot of year 15 work together, but Goldstein Hall is a very special law firm in New York City that works with for-profits and not-for-profits and is committed to preservation of affordable housing and really the well-being of the affordable housing assets in New York City. And so I welcome Brian today as a moderator for Modern Love Joint Ventures webinar because as everyone knows, partnerships are not always easy. The other presenters today are Steve Kirk from Rural Neighborhoods. Rural Neighborhoods has over almost 1,800 units and is based in Homestead, Florida, which is now in the midst of Tropical Storm Eta. And so, Steve, I hope you can stay with us and nothing happens to your internet connections. Rural Neighborhoods does JV partnerships with smaller organizations. They JV, they co-develop, all for the purpose of stabilizing portfolios. Next is Malcolm Punter. Malcolm and I have also worked together for a very, very long time. Harlem Congregations for Community Improvements, HCCI, has syndicated 14 LIHTC deals, low-income housing tax credit deals, with my company, National Equity Fund, through the New York Equity Fund, and through the 20 plus years I've been with LISC and NEF, Malcolm and I have collaborated kind of through thick and thin on many, many projects. So I welcome Malcolm to the panel. Harrison Rayford and Lamore Realty have also been part of the portfolio of NEF deals through the New York Equity Fund. And Harrison and his partner, Ken Morrison, have a for-profit development and property management organization based in New York. And they JV partner, they property manage, and they're great folks to work with. So that's the big picture introduction to all our panelists today. So welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who's going to moderate our discussion. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for having us on. We look forward to this panel today. So the intent of this panel, entitled Modern Love, is to get everyone interacting with each other. We're going to start with a brief introduction done by myself on joint ventures and why we're even talking about it, why even do it, what to look out for. Then we're going to have the panelists speak for their allotted time about the deals that they're doing, how they view partnerships. We're lucky to have 2 not-for-profits and 1 for-profit sponsor on the panel today, so we get a robust viewpoint, different angles, and see how they view joint venture partnerships. Then we're going to follow that with a panel discussion. I'll be asking these panelists specific questions and general questions about why they partner and what specific details are important to them. We'll then lead to a Q&A where we hopefully have the audience recommend and post some questions in the Q&A part of their screen. We can answer those as they come in. We'll finally wrap up a little bit, and I guess there's a part about Cham, plug for Cham. So let's get started with the next slide, please.
Hey, Brian, you can hear me? You can hear me? I'm just going to be playing a minute with my screen, so you'll see the slides in a minute again, okay?
All right.
Give me a second. I'm working on my share.
Like all partnerships, sometimes there's hiccups. So it doesn't always go well like this panel, but we'll get it together. And
how's that?
Here we go. All right. So Modern Love. So why did we title it Modern Love? It's because, you know, love can be a beautiful thing, rewarding and meaningful in every way. But you know, there's pros and cons, and sometimes there's ups and downs. And in those downs, you want to make sure that you're adequately protected and thought about all the reasons that led you to that situation, and how did you protect yourself in some ways. And while we're not advocating for prenups in this panel, you know, in terms of your legal recourse and your legal documents, we certainly think you should have your so-called ducks in a row when you're thinking about or before you actually marry your partner, because it really is a marriage in many ways, and short or long term. So if there's any way we could skip to the next slide, we can dive right in. Okay, so today we're focusing on not-for-profit joint venturing with a for-profit, or not-for-profit focusing on a joint venturing with a not-for-profit. Those are the kind of joint ventures we're talking about today, and focusing on affordable housing transactions nationally. We have Harrison and Malcolm who are focused in New York, but they're doing things in other states, and Steve in Florida, and doing things in other states as well. So with that in mind, let's start with why would a not-for-profit joint venture at all? Next slide, please. Okay, so there's many reasons why a not-for-profit would want to joint venture. So there are fewer sites available from the government. So at least in New York, there's tax lien foreclosures happening. They were happening for a long period of time through this investment and other reasons when the Bronx was burning and the city wasn't what it was today. And so through the tax lien foreclosure rounds, properties would come onto the market. The city would have an RFP process for them, and many not-for-profits would end up winning those. And that's how they started their business and how they are growing it to this day. But in you know, as investment has been given into these communities and into these sites, the tax lien foreclosure world has dwindled, especially in the city, and so there now are fewer sites available from the government or the local agency. Another reason is inadequate experience. So not-for-profits have many calls to action, many responsibilities, getting pulled in different directions all the time. And so real estate development may not be their primary focus. And so they may need to joint venture with a partner to gain that and to learn it, even to grow from it. Inadequate capital, I think, goes without saying that not-for-profits are strained. Most not-for-profits are strained financially. Most of them rely on donations, federal, state, local financing, and grants. And so it's hard for them to do a big project without a partner who has the liquidity and net worth to finance such a deal. Lack of staff, again, not-for-profits generally have many different operations running at the same time, and staffing is always a consideration in terms of, are they able to focus the attention to do a development project, to operate it, to manage it, to asset management It takes quite a team to run a project, especially a real estate development project. And to that end, what does a for-profit bring? Because always when you're thinking about joint venturing, you're probably gonna have to give up something to get something. And so why go to a for-profit? For-profits is access to financing. So they're out there, I mean, at least that's their mantra, is to do a deal. They always wanna do a deal for the cheapest, usually for the most advantageous, technically cheapest route possible. And so access to financing, that's their business, right? They're able to get good investment terms, debt and equity side to facilitate a deal. Financial strength, ability to provide guarantees. Again, so for-profits generally have a stronger net worth, balance sheet, and liquidity to do a deal that someone like a LIHTC syndicator or a debt financer could actually bank on. And if there was a problem, they can rely on the sponsor to fill the gap. Increased production and results. This is, again, just what for-profits, their model is to do deals, to get out and find acquisition in good products. So that's why you would bring them in. Skill building. So part of every joint venture is to learn from each other. Not-for-profits being certain skill sets and for-profits being certain skill sets. And so where one lacks, you would hope that both sides will learn from each other. So if you go to the next slide, please.
It's coming. Here we go.
All right.
Right into it.
That's right. Why would a for-profit developer joint venture with not-for-profit? So now we're swinging to the other side. Thinking why it's one thing to bring in a partner, and another reason to want to bring them in. Okay, so for the for-profit, so I can play Tetris here. There may for the for-profit there may be access to more sites. Again, the for-profits are out there day in, day out, speaking to brokers, speaking to property owners, and looking to originate deals. So they may have more access to that than a not-for-profit who is trying to serve their purpose and their charitable purpose. Access to public subsidies. The not-for-profit is generally is able to get below market financing, whether through the city, state, or local agencies, RFPs, and demand for nonprofit engagement. And so they're able to access it more and leverage that public subsidy with private dollars to get a better deal overall for the project. That kind of ties into the access to the debt and greater community political support. So, not-for-profits are limited in terms of the lobbying that they can do. And so with for-profits, sometimes they're able to bring greater community political support. Not-for-profits, they also bring their own skill set. And it's important to state that everyone brings something to the table in a joint venture. And usually some things are these, access to public subsidies and governmental agencies. So not-for-profits, generally speaking, are more engaged with the community, have great relationships with the community and governmental agencies. They're preserving affordability. They're serving their tenants, serving their communities. And that usually leads to further donations, further below market financing, and something that not-for-profits can use and leverage. Tax abatements and exemptions. In the city release, there's exemptions for affordable housing, not-for-profit 501c3 501c3 partners are eligible for a very beneficial tax exemption called 420c in New York City. When combined with LIHTC, it's really an attractive source. Real estate taxes and water are two of the highest expenses for a development project. And at least in New York, and I understand in the nation, there are advantages for non-for-profits that are not otherwise available to for-profits. Community relationships, again, not-for-profits, generally speaking, are in the community, on the streets, on the pavement, with the community. with the local leaders and really can coalesce the team on the streets for each project. And so when you need that, if your project's not as of right, if there's a zoning variance or some kind of waiver needed, and it's important to have a not-for-profit to speak on your behalf at your public hearings. Next slide, please. Okay, so so those are the reasons why you would even consider joint venturing with a not-for-profit or for-profit. Again, that's not the end-all be-all, and we're going to hear a lot more from panelists today who probably have their own ideas, will have their own ideas as to why they joint venture or do not joint venture with certain people and certain entities. But at the very least, in any joint venture, you should be considering these next issues. And if you go to the next slide, please. In any joint venture, you'll want to make sure that you document the partnership. So it's very common that I get calls from clients all the time and say, we have this deal, you know, I really trust them. We just want to do a non-binding LOI, get the ball moving. And because legal process takes too long, attorneys bill by the hour, and it takes too long to get a deal done. And while some of that may be true, I think there's certainly ways to facilitate a deal and make sure both sides are protected. And so it's important to document the partnership, regardless if it's a small or large deal. We highly recommend that you do it because you never know when, day one the deal comes in, it looks rosy on both sides, it can turn quickly. And so whenever I talk to a client about a new joint venture deal, it's always important, at least 4 things to keep in mind, at the very least. The cost to get in, is there some kind of contribution either side needs to put in? Maybe, generally speaking, nonprofits put the land in, the for-profits bring the redevelopment money, guarantee, go out and find a deal and do the deal, right? That things have changed and morphed through the years, and so that kind of dynamic may not be as true today as it once was. But generally speaking, what does it cost to get in? Make sure you understand why you're initially there. Benefits. What are the benefits that you're getting out of this joint venture deal? Economically, legally, politically, what is it? And make sure you document that correctly. Your liabilities. In any deal, there's going to be a liability. But what is it costing you? Whether it's the inability to do another deal, whether it's a monetary consideration, is it reputational risk? What is it? And make sure you clarify that and try to mitigate that. And of course, how do you get out? We're seeing that people not wanting to think about that divorce, not wanting to really get into the dissolution and the dispute resolution phase because you never really want to talk about failure. When you're starting a new deal, you want to talk about how it's going to be a great success. And so those conversations of, when we have a problem, what do we do? Those are difficult conversations to have, but I think it's important to talk about that. Private endearment. So as most not-for-profits understand, these are not your own personal piggy banks. The officers, the board directors, the staff all work for the benefit of the not-for-profit, the public. And so certain, side deals or individual deals where an officer is getting privately compensated is not something that is legal or recommended. Charter purpose. You always want to go back to your governing documents and understand why you're doing this. Is affordable housing part of your charter purpose? Well, how do you define affordable housing? How do you define your charter purpose? And how does this project, and how does your leverage of your tax exemption, of your not-for-profit status, how does that go to your charter purpose? So always keep that in mind whenever you're doing a deal. For your not-for-profits out there, unrelated business income tax, UBIT, is always something you should be considering. UBIT is basically, as a not-for-profit, your purposes are for charitable purposes. So anything that is not substantially related to your charitable purpose, you get taxed on. And that is not something that is probably undertaken or understood or budgeted for. And so to the extent that you do face UBIT, not only are you facing a tax, you could be also facing a withdrawal or a revocation of your 501c3 status. it's important that you understand the risk, and sometimes you understand the risk and you accept that risk and you have it budgeted in terms of your project. But most of the time, our not-for-profit clients are not assuming a UBIC tax. And this last point to understand for both sides really is what is your ability to protect and enforce your rights, your reputation, your standing in the community, your standing with your investors, your syndicators, your project funders, because this one deal could tank your ability to do other deals, right? So how do you exit the deal? What are your indemnifications? What are your rights to maybe dilute or evict or push out your partner? Those are all things you need to understand and have those conversations with your attorneys, with your partners up front, and, so you really understand who you're getting in bed with, not literally. And I think if you take these 5 points and understand them while you're generating your partnership agreement, you'll be on your path forward to success.
Ryan, there's a question in the chat about how do you prove control as a not-for-profit so as not to run afoul of IRS regulations?
Sure. So the IRS will tell you there's no percentage income, there's no percentage ownership that really will determine if you will face UBIT or if you're in violation of your governing documents. What they will tell you is it's based on the totality of the circumstances. It's are you able to proceed on your mission and your purpose, and how are you able to protect and enforce that? So a lot of our deals have the not-for-profit as a 0.01 or 1% owner of a project, and that does fit their mission. They're highly regulated. There's a regulatory agreement on it. There's major decisions as to certain regulatory regimes, rent incomes, AMIs, rents themselves. So if you looked at just the 0.1 or the 0.1 ownership, you would say, well, there's no way that that's enough control to determine, to further the not-for-profit purpose. However, if you look at the entire deal, you would say, oh, okay, so they're not able to do X, Y, Z. They're not able to evict tenants just because. They're not able to not accept Section 8 tenants just because. So all of these things will lead you to believe, okay, now if I look at everything, yes, it does further their affordable housing mission, because they're providing space that otherwise wouldn't be available on the market.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll end my part there. Hopefully that was a nice brief introduction to what the panelists will help elucidate and further these conversations. So our next, that's a disclaimer that every attorneys put on every slide. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to start with Malcolm Punter's Executive Director of HCCI, a great not-for-profit here doing great work in New York and beyond.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Lisa and Julia and the Cham team and NYEF and LISC. And I echo the sentiment that Lisa expressed. You know, it's been a pleasure working with you over 18 years in this industry. Not only at HCCI, which I have been employed for 12 years and have been the president for the last 4 years. When I was at a private, one of my small family office, we worked closely with LISC and NYEF as well. So that experience and that success in providing affordable housing certainly has spanned almost 2 decades for me, and it's been a pleasure to continue to offer affordable housing to community members and the community, in fact, that I were reared in, and see the changes in the Harlem community over the last 30 years is really, really dear to my heart, and certainly makes an impact on me personally, because I'm married and I raised my family and my children here. So to see the Harlem community make such a dramatic physical and economic change and be a part of that impact is really what affordable housing development is about. It's what Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement was created for in 1986 by a cadre of spiritual leaders, religious leaders, men and women, who understood that the revitalization of Harlem was necessary, not only for the residents of Harlem, but also for the whole New York City, and as an example for our great nation in this particular sector of business, this affordable housing sector. But I think that joint venturing generally is something that is the foundation of the HCCI. And I'm happy to talk about this topic today with one of our partners, who is Lamore, Mr. Rayford, Harrison Rayford, who's joining us here today. And I thank you all for inviting me to talk about and represent HCCI in its work during this time. I do have, I want to emphasize that HCCI has all sorts of relationships with public and private entities. Obviously, we work very hard with the New York City government through the HPD, as well as New York State HCR, with the associated syndicators over the 35 years, to make sure that we build quality affordable housing so that the residents of the community can continue to improve their lives and become upwardly mobile and have an opportunity for themselves and their children to be successful. So that's really what it is about for us. And I wanted to sort of preface my statements with that, because all of the work of the people that are here with us, over 150 attendees, is essential work and is very important. And HCCI, having started it in a relatively small community and compared to the whole country, and now we're looking to replicate that model. So Ryan, I just wanted to talk about that and how important that is for us as an organization. And HCCI, it is a non-for-profit 501c3, and we're governed by a board of directors. And my leadership style is to make sure that our board of directors is intimately involved in all of the decision-making aspects for our organization. So we manage, the board governs by committee. So we have a real estate committee that reviews all of our real estate transactions. They are comprised, as of the last 5 years, of people who have some industry experience, as well as attorneys who now sit on the board. And I would say that HCCI has made a makeover, if you will, the last 5 years, and in general, and specifically the last 5 years, but in general in the last 10 years, when we began to take a look at our expiring LIHTC projects, becoming in the first 15 years and needing to decide what we want to do with these projects. We certainly knew, as per our mission, that they were going to continue to remain affordable housing, but the decision on whether we should re-syndicate or develop those deals in some other model of affordable housing was a decision point that we had to make. And a lot of times that was based upon the condition of our organization at that moment. And that decision meant that do we have enough liquidity to continue to go and develop on our own? As an organization, we've been involved in the development over 5,000 units of housing, and I think Lisa mentioned 14 of our projects that have been worked with NYEF and NEF, but we've had other projects working with other syndicators. If I were to give you a ratio, I would say that about 85% of our housing has been low-income housing tax credit projects. About 10% has been co-ops, cooperative housing, home ownership type of housing, even brownstone development, and then 5% has been about market rate housing. And we'll talk about some of that as we sit here today, because while HCCI as an umbrella is a not-for-profit as everybody knows here, my responsibility as the president of HCCI and as the president of the general partners in many cases, those activities are not always not-for-profit activities. So a not-for-profit developer has to not only understand their role and obligation as a not-for-profit under the IRS code, but he also has a duty and responsibility to operate buildings effectively under partnership law and under the limited partnership agreements. So those are the skill sets that I find most useful, and much of that keeps me going back for continuing training and continuing improvement. In terms of by way of background, I have a business degree, an MBA. I also have a law degree in tax, and also a doctorate in research, and so those skill sets and that continuous improvement in education is very meaningful as a leader in the not-for-profit development sector, because as deals become more complex and we're sort of inventing the statutes and the case law as we go along, because when we started with the tax code of 1986, LIHTC was new to all of us. But as those deals began to turn over in 15 years, a lot of the restructuring happened. Much of that, has to be developed as law firms like Goldstein Hall prepare documents and situations are litigated in a court, just to see to make precedent on how these projects would continue to prosper. But we've had some great experiences with companies like Lamore, because Lamore is a for-profit entity, but they're more aligned with the interests of affordable housing because of their origins. They have similar origins as a HCCI in terms of being a Harlem-based developer, a developer from people that lived in the community. And my next slide is sort of an example of a project that was creative. This happened not to be with Lamore, but was another partnership. This is called Victory Plaza, and it's sort of the Victory Plaza is the second phase of a project that HCCI developed solely without partners in 1999, which was called a Victory Victory One Housing Development Fund Corporation. So that was a HUD 202 project and continues to thrive. The Victory One is 110 units of housing for seniors, and the Victory Plaza was the second phase of that, which we built on a parking lot next to it. So that's second phase is 135 units. So one might ask, because HCCI has done projects on its own, has historically had partnerships with groups like Jonathan Rose, many of you know, L&M, Exact Capital, DuVernay and Brooks, for example, and also Lamore Realty. What goes into the decision-making process for HCCI? I remember I talked about in 2000, around 2010, that was about our 25th year. There was an ebb in HCCI's operations. We had been, a long-term developer, but we didn't have a lot of cash at the time. So we really had to make decisions on how to respond to year 15 of a large segment of our portfolio. So we actually began to consolidate. I think we consolidated 6 LIHTC projects in partnership with another group. And one of the things that we decided is it had to decide, how do we partner under these circumstances? So one of the things that I recommended to the board of directors of HCCI, and at that time I was the head of the real estate development division, and I said that under all circumstances, if we are the sponsor of the deal, nobody's asking us to come into their particular project, then my recommendation was that we maintain 51% ownership of the project, even if we're dividing someone to come in. And the board really wasn't familiar with that type of concept because they don't get into the day-to-day. But 51% of ownership has a meaning, right? Financially, it has a meaning per IRS interpretation and definition, but it also has a meaning in terms of how the organization sees itself. It sees itself as, the originator of the projects, and why would we give up that project after working so hard? So ownership percentage for us is important. So we want to make sure we maintain 51% ownership. And then if there's any invitation for a partner, potential partner, we would talk about the acquisition coming into the partnership income, what it means to asset manage, and if there's any responsibility, we want to make sure we maintain that responsibility. And then, it's a profit-making venture for all of us, because even though we're not-for-profits, we still have to have cash in order to survive and to maintain our mission. So we would make sure that we split the cash flow. We know that JVs, partnership with for-profit entities, might have some substantial benefits. So we want to make sure that they have a meaningful ownership stake, and that they also get access to developer fees for leveraging their balance sheet or their experience. And then this slide really speaks to me educating the board of directors or our other constituents, like our partnership houses of worship in our churches, because many of them do not know what is entailed in real estate value, right? There's a lot of value in real estate. Of course, there's equity, which sort of centers around ownership, future market value. What is the value today? What is the appraised value today? But what is the appraised value after rehab or after construction, or 10? What's the projection 10 years down the line? Many of the organizations and even our board didn't understand, what's the refinance value, right? Right now, there's refinance value in this marketplace. You may have entered a deal at 8%. Now rates are at 4%. How does that, reduce your expenses and your cost? And then there's also developer fees that might be inside the transaction that's important. Do you share the developer fees, or do you give the developer fees in exchange for a right of first refusal? Some exit out of the partnership, like Brian had mentioned. And then, a lot of times when you bring in a for-profit developer, like for HCCI used to property manage their properties, but in 2010 they decided that that wasn't successful for them, that they were better developers and sponsors than property managers. So we bring Lamore Realty because they have experience in not only development but ongoing operations of the project. So I'll end there. Certainly can speak more about it, but I'll end there, Brian.
Yeah,
Take any
that's
questions.
thank you, Malcolm. That's a great segue into Harrison's presentation. Harrison, the co-managing member of Lamore Development, I'll give it to you. Yeah, Harrison, you're on mute.
Sorry. Cham staff, Lisa, Brian, Malcolm, Julia, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on this panel. The past couple years, we've started to get more involved and go to the meetings of Cham, and we're training our asset management staff to be involved. So we think it's a great organization. I've worked with everyone here on the panel, so it's very good. Lamore Development, we grew out of Lamore Realty, and that's the development and acquisition arm of Lamore Realty. We've been around since 2012. Since that time, we've developed about 1,200 units. We've bought general partnership interests. We've syndicated a 9% deal. We've done straight new construction, no tax credits with New York City HDC. We're doing a RAD deal right now. We probably have about 2,500 units in our pipeline over the next 6 months. So we see that there's a lot of opportunity out here. And, we think that joint venture partnerships are critical in this market and probably in most markets. I think Malcolm made some very good points. And when we think about a JV, Brian really is right. It's a marriage, right? So, and when you think about, getting married to someone, you got to set the terms, right? Of what you're going to expect, what you want. We also believe as a company that joint ventures should be mutually beneficial. It can't just be one-sided, right? What are you bringing to the table? You should get some benefit for that, or you should get, it should be recognized that you're doing X, Y, and Z. And then what is the other person doing? So typically when we do a joint venture, we sit down with a sheet of paper and we say, okay, who's going to do this? Who's going to do the day-to-day accounting goal? Who's going to do the property management? Who's going to do the asset management? What's the goal of the joint venture? What's the intent of the joint venture? And, I think that Brian, he went over it very quickly, but having discussions about if you have to break up, it's always better to do those on the front end than on the back, right? So, hey man, if we have to get divorced, what does it look like? What would you be comfortable with? How will we do it? Will we get an appraisal? Will you get a right of first refusal if we want to sell it? I think all of those decisions need to be made from day one, and it needs to be laid out, and everyone needs to be on the same page. Your interests have to be aligned. So with Lamore and HCCI, we believe in affordable housing, and it's critical. If we were market rate developers, I don't know if we'd be doing a lot of deals with HCCI. That's not their goal, right? So your interests have to be aligned. Who makes the major decisions? Who's the managing member? What does that look like? Do I have to get approval every time we want to do a transaction over $10,000, $20,000? Property management, how is that set up? How do you report to the other members of the entity or the joint venture partnership? And we also think that asset management is critical as you're starting to put this JV together and all these responsibilities are being delegated. Asset management is critical. I didn't fully understand the importance of asset management as I came from a different shop when I worked downtown in New York City. We did a lot of high-rise condos. So as I began to develop a portfolio, I began to understand the importance of asset management, right? Lisa and NEF, and they want to see that you have staff, a team. How do you report? How is your reporting? And so all of that flows back up into your JV agreement. Who does the reporting? Who talks to NEF? Who talks to Brian and Goldstein Hall as how do you come up with your operating agreement? Who makes the financial matters decisions? The profits and losses, how they allocate it. So if you're dealing with a nonprofit and a for-profit, generally the appreciation comes more to the way of the for-profit. And we like that, right? And we also think there are a number of other things that a not-for-profit can bring to the table. They can help with community engagement. They can help with tax abatements. We think that those are critical in the New York City market. As you're coming out of year 15 deals, you got to be able to get a tax abatement so you can program your deal out for the next 15 to 30 years. Let's see, Brian, I think I hit most of my high points, but I think it's very important to set the tone for who's to do what. And I can't belabor that enough. I mean, Brian and I have a routine. We go over everything. Who's going to do X, Y, and Z, and then you talk to before you have your conversation with your JV partner, you say, hey, what do you want to do in this transaction, right? What's our goal here? Oh, okay, we want to develop affordable housing. How long do we want to keep the housing for? And then we take it to Brian and we do an operating agreement, which is our manual for how we will proceed in the transaction. And once we do that, I haven't had as many problems, but I must say I did some deals before we set up that system where I've had some problems, right?
We'll definitely get into those war stories a little bit after. Let's go see the opportunity,
okay.
And then we'll come back and we'll start the panel conversation. But Steve, rural neighborhoods, let's give you some time now to talk about what you're doing down in Florida. You're on mute, Steve. And let's also be cognizant of the time here. We're at 1 o'clock and live talk now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Steve Kirk. I'm president of Rural Neighborhoods. And we are a moderate-sized nonprofit developer. Our primary lines of business are multifamily housing. We also do property management and asset management, but we're a relatively narrow group involved in the development process. Today, we have a portfolio of 1,796 units They range from 4 to 144 properties in 9 counties, about 24 rental communities. We are a group that's experiencing about 35% growth in 2020 to 2021. We have 630 units in our current pipeline that are funded that we hope to complete construction in the next 24 months. And we have 400 additional units for which we've acquired land for a larger period of time in the future of our pipeline. Consequently, joint venture partnerships has become an incredibly important tool to us. And despite being rural, with apologies to those of you from Montana and North Dakota, Florida's like California. We're 45 minutes from urban centers almost everywhere in our state. And so we are certainly suburban today and moving into closer to cities in our communities. These are just 2 projects in which we are currently under construction. The first slide, $32 million, is a joint venture with a nonprofit partner. And our second project in Gainesville, Florida, is a joint venture with a for-profit partner. A nonprofit partner. And so as we move to the next slide, we have done joint ventures over the course of our 25 years of development. Using our modern love theme, when we first began doing developments probably 15 years ago, our first project is reaching year 15. We decided to do joint ventures in which we characterized it as dating, not marriage. We developed projects in which we and a for-profit developer shared developer fees on a relatively unequal basis. But our trade-off was for them to leave at stabilization. And so we've remained the sole general partner for the 14 of the 15 years of those joint ventures, acquiring all the cash flow from the project in those subsequent years and all the decision-making. Just the next slide. Both this and these projects were examples of those. And it is enjoyable to have a short-lived joint venture where possible, because literally there is nothing that keeps us from operating these properties in accordance with our mission. But as we've grown and begun to develop our projects, and as we've gotten busier, if we go to the next slide, our methodology is beginning to change. As I said, in our historic model, we would share developer fees from somewhere between a 50-50 split of developer fees to a 25-75% of developer fees when we saw our for-profit partner depart. Their interest was getting in and getting out. Our interest was to get them in and get them out. And so they retired at stabilization. We maintained the ROFR, which is now the right of first refusal, which is becoming an important tool to us as these projects, these first 2 projects, end up in year 13 and year 15 as we're beginning to negotiate exits. But our new model, a model that we've really begun to employ since 2019, is a situation in which we're looking to both nonprofit and for-profits as longer-term relationships, as true marriages. And in those instances, we have renegotiated developer fees to a more commensurate basis. We've maintained 51% ownership of the general partnership interests. And I should note that as we talk about 51-49, whether you're in business as a minority member with a for-profit company or whether you're the minority partner in a nonprofit partnership, I've certainly heard enough war stories from those who are the minority partners with nonprofits to realize not every relationship is a good one. And when you're at 49%, you might as well have one. If you haven't decided on the decision-making and which decisions are mutual, you lose every vote at 51-49 as much as you do at 80-20. The other thing I think everyone needs to realize is that the ownership interests are not necessarily the economic split. And so there are certainly deals in which you may be a 51-49 owner of a project, may relate to decision-making, but the economics of the deal may be at a totally different percentage. And 49% ownership doesn't mean that you're having 49% of the fees generated, 49% of the cash flow. And so in our new model, we serve as the managing partner. We've decided as a board of directors that our mission is to remain the managing partner in the project. We have a very explicit decision-making tree as to what decisions are mutual between us and our partner, be it for-profit or nonprofit, and which decisions we reserve for ourselves. And typically, we're reserving decisions on tax credit investor. We're reserving decisions on debt financing. We're reserving decisions on construction, so general contractor selection, because those are economic relationships that we're going to be involved with 15 years. And if we have a minority partner, we're generally not reaching mutual decisions on those. We will try to, but we're reserving the opportunity to make those decisions. Things like architectural selection, design, perhaps even property management, we might make those decisions ones in which we attempt to agree and certainly go through that process before exerting our power as a managing partner. But those are the kinds of decisions that we do. And in our new model, we also share cash flow. We also, in some of our instances with nonprofit partners, will jointly share the right of first refusal. And in default, we would take that if they're not interested. Next slide. Why does rural neighborhoods do this? Well, as we've grown and as we begin to grow more rapidly, we find that the joint venture, and this is a particular example in this last 2 years where we're seeing a 35% growth, we have to be realistic about our limitations. We have a certain amount of working capital, and although that is several millions of dollars of working capital, there is a balance sheet limitation as to the amount of monies that we can guarantee. There is a staff capacity. When we fortuitously won 4 tax credit projects in a single cycle, it had a tendency to overwhelm staff capacity. And despite having one or more of those as 100% nonprofit, we felt that we could limit our risk by increasing staff capacity. And so we sought in a competitive fashion, a for-profit joint venture partner. And so we find that it extends what we can do as an organization with approximately $5 million worth of cash, $150 million worth of assets, to be able to have partners that will extend our balance sheet when we're faced with guarantee issues and contingent liabilities. From a nonprofit perspective in particular, we find that the joint ventures allow us to expand geographically. A nonprofit partner offers us goodwill in a community in which we may not have experience. We find that they give us insight into the market, which we might not possess. And I think, as we all understand, demand takes local knowledge to truly understand site location, et cetera. We specifically, from an asset management and a property management perspective, look at our expansion and our joint ventures to basically ask the question, is this going to enhance our property management efficiency? Does it move us in a community in which we may only have 80 units to a place where we have 160 units? Does it fill out a region in which we may now be able to regionalize our management and have a regional manager when before we did not? So our real estate development growth and our joint venturing does basically have a direct relationship to the effectiveness and efficiency of our property management. And we as a board and as a group make choices sometimes because we have nonprofit peers approach us. And peer-to-peer relationships are one of the criteria that we've set out for saying, why would we go someplace that today we might not be? And it's because we have a fellow member from Rural LISC or from Enterprise or from NeighborWorks who basically say, we'd like you to come into our community. We have a lead on a piece of land. So those are, again, some of the reasons we make that choice. And then our last slide, we're doing something that's a bit of a variation of a theme. We are actively engaged in acquiring properties, and in essence, it's a partnership, whether it ends up being a joint venture or not. So today we seek what we call orphaned nonprofit properties. It's a typical group that built a property 15 years ago, has a property manager, hasn't built something else, ask themselves each quarter why they're meeting as a board of directors, and just hoping to be taken out. And so we have in the past done 127 units that we've acquired. That's about 7.5% of our portfolio through joint by basically merging or bringing other organizations under our wing as a related organization or as a controlled entity. We have 175 units pending. And we have found that building this portfolio through mergers and dissolutions and assumptions, we've used a number of legal tools. You know, we say quote unquote merger, but it's rarely a true merger. It's really been either an assumption of their debt, an assumption of their properties, or perhaps if it's been a very narrow track record, we will take over the corporation. But for us, those type of partnerships, those type of joint ventures help us with the pace and timing. They give us the ability to do acquisition without the constraint of a competitive purchase. We're not capable today of reaching out for a 15-year tax credit project and competing with all the REITs or the more experienced for-profit organizations. And so by identifying these orphan properties, we're able to set our own pace in terms of doing that and having extended due diligence. So those are some of the ways that Rural Neighborhoods uses joint ventures in its work. It's become an increasing element. Certainly, I think I've been with the organization for 25 years. I think at the beginning of this process, we sort of looked at them with a certain amount of skepticism. Today, I think we've changed to make it basically a true essential tool.
There's a question in the chat about JV agreements. Is anyone willing to share a JV agreement? And how do you share the right of first refusal?
Well, the right of first refusal is when you're 100% nonprofit partner, a pretty routine request. And certainly it is of incredible economic value when we get to year 15, particularly as we've seen the value and equity that remains. I'll let Brian address that probably a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, so I think when you're saying share, you have a joint venture partner, and you have with right of first refusal, you get a better price, a minimum fair market value price. That is a very attractive price, and I assume what you're saying is that you would exercise that as not a profit, and then going forward, slip back or give back after your transaction close on that ROFR. To whatever deal term you have agreed to?
Well, I would say this. I would say that in our nonprofit partnerships, we elect to be able to purchase it together. So one or the other of us will take the right of first refusal. We don't give it up, but we will sometimes share it with a partner from whom we have respect, which is all of our partners. But in a for-profit circumstance, we may negotiate them being a special limited partner and us remaining as the general partner. And if possible, we will try to retain the right of first refusal. Most of our joint venture partners in the for-profit sector today also understand that residual value and want to negotiate that away. So it's a bargaining tool as to whether and how we price keeping or giving up the right of first refusal in a for-profit, nonprofit deal.
Yeah, and that makes sense because the ROFR is only for 501c3 not-for-profits. Let's start the panel. Thank you so much, Steve, for that insight. Let's start a few panel questions. I know we don't actually have that much time left, but let me start by, this is Modern Love Stories, so we do want to hear actual stories from our panelists, good or bad. And I think, Harrison, you had mentioned a little bit about some of the bad stories. To the extent you can, no need to name names or anything. Kind of what happened, how did you deal with it? Maybe give some guidance to our audience out there, what you learned from that. So maybe Harrison, if you could start, and I'll ask Malcolm and Steve the same thing after.
Sorry, it's the classic JV story going wrong, right? Your interests aren't aligned. You don't state your position from the beginning, and you call Brian, you say, hey, I need to just do a quick agreement. I know these people, I think it's gonna work, so on and so forth. And you don't go through the proper channels. You don't set the terms of the relationship. And we got down the road and they were thinking one thing and we were thinking something else. And you either sit down and you have a meeting, you say, hey, this is kind of what I think. And, you know, for us to move forward, this is kind of what it needs to be. And if it doesn't work, then I've learned to just move on, you know. But I think that it's critical that you've got to set the expectations, like Steve's saying, like, you know, it's what do you want? This is what we want. And then you verbalize that and put it down on paper for your partner, and they don't want to go with it. You move on to the next group, you know. But just these misunderstandings have always led to bad transactions, you know. And
Can you talk a little bit about decision-making in property management?
yeah, so I think, you know, we're vertically integrated, right? So we can do the property management, asset management, so on and so forth. But I think it's picking the strongest things that your partnership can do, right? So, you know, we're working on something with Malcolm now at HCCI, but, you know, we own units in that area, right? And we think that we can have efficiencies in that area, right? Like, I don't know if I'd be trying to manage something that HCCI owns that's in Philadelphia, right? We want to play to our strengths. And I think it has to be an iterative conversation with your partner, and you sit down and you talk about, you know, who does what do you see the problems, what needs to be addressed. It just has to be a interactive dialogue. It can't just be, we don't try to approach a partnership with a nonprofit or a for-profit for that matter, just one-sided, right? We try to sit down with our partners, and, you know, even Goldstein Hall and LISC and NEF, they're our partners, right? You got to explain to them you're in a relationship with these people. So, yeah, that's Malcolm.
Malcolm.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll describe, I know we talked about partnership as a two-way relationship, but we got into a partnership with a three-way, so to speak, and that didn't work very well. In fact, our co-partners, you know, were presented to us as aligned, and then once, you know, the pen dried, they were disaligned very quickly, and this is truly a bad experience, and all the way through a court action. So while I won't get into details, it was very difficult, as the not-for-profit who had a reputation and really essentially invited, you know, some of the partners brought in properties as well, but we essentially invited, you know, these groups into a very large segment of our portfolio, and then, you know, things blew up. So you have to be very careful on, you know, to make sure we vet, you know, the partners and relationships, and make sure that the people are not, you know, that the documents, that they understand the legal documents and the roles and responsibilities, and that there's nothing vague in those documents, because that could end tragically, and almost ended tragically for us. But we were able to leverage our experience and our political capital to realign the folks that were disaligned.
Let me add 2 points. One, in terms of joint ventures gone bad. You live and learn. We have $1 million learning experience, which we rather not have. And one begins to consult with Brian and his fellow members of the bar to think through risks that you didn't think through the previous time. And so in our instance, we ended up in a litigation with our general contractor. And the problem that was poised was, how do partners who disagree with how far litigation go resolve that issue? Right. And after 5 years of construction litigation, we clearly address litigation issues now in our mutual decision making, or how we make decisions, so that it never happens to us again. So there are risks that are not generic, and you begin to have an experience with a risk that you didn't enjoy, and you correct in the future. You get in, you know, and you'll find people going, well, why are you putting this much detail in about that issue? It's because you were burned once. In regard to the property management decision, we're vertically integrated too. We manage about 2/3 of our properties. And we do asset management obviously on all of our properties. And we have a small asset management staff, 1 staff person. So we're not very large in that area. But I describe this to prospective partners and frankly to tax credit purchasers as that Rural Neighborhoods looks at property management in a realistic fashion. We believe we are really good managers when it comes to HUD type properties, USDA rural development properties, those properties with government funding, those properties with rental assistance. But I think we also realize that, and we do use a third-party manager on about 25% of our properties, 20% of our properties. We do realize that they are better at certain things. We believe we're better at cost control. We believe they're better at marketing, particularly social marketing. And so we really look at the project to determine who's the best manager. We're not irrational insisting upon us being the manager. We're open to whatever makes the best deal. And in truth, it may not be your joint venture partner who's helping make that call. Maybe your limited partner who's helping make that call, because they're obviously trying to mitigate their risk.
Yeah, thank you. So with the limited time we have left, I think it makes one last panel Q&As. So let's try to do this last one. For my last question, and I have so many, but we'll just do this one. And since we do have a large asset management audience, let's focus on that. With you guys are doing all these deals, these great large and small development deals. When do you bring in your asset management staff to work with your development staff, or maybe they're even the same for the not-for-profits? When do you bring them in? How important is your asset management staff to your overall deal and success of it?
Right. Lisa.
You bring them in on day one. There's no question about that. Not later.
Sooner the better.
Yeah.
Sorry, right answer. There's
All right, we're done. That's it. Anyone disagree?
I agree. Lisa is correct. You have to bring them in the front end because they need to be able to advise the development team as well as the eventual property management team, who should be already decided on the front end of the project on what the expectations are and should be going forward. So the way HCCI handles it, we make sure that if we're not the managing partner, then we're going to be the asset manager. So we're going to watch the day-to-day activities on an ongoing basis of our property management company as well as our managing member or managing partner, and that's written into the agreements and the documents.
So thanks, Malcolm. I think we're getting ready to wrap up. There's a poll on the screen. When does your asset management team get brought into the new development deal? Please, is it fully integrated into the development deal early on in the planning process, only when the development team needs something or when the funding is secured, or after the deal closes? So, Julie, are you tabulating responses?
5 more seconds. Here it comes. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Wait till you see the answers. What do you think? It's the way you want it, Lisa. Pretty good, huh?
Early on, must be. I kind of, I handed out the answer beforehand, or people don't want to be wrong. If you did it later, it's fine.
So I see we have a few questions in the Q&A, but also we want to reserve time for the Cham and the Cham staff. Do a little plug. Do we have time for the Q&A, or do you want to?
What we can do is we can see if people want to stay on. Like, we could go on another 10 minutes if people want to do that. We want to just do a closeout for those who are going to leave. So if we could just take a minute or two, Lisa, we'll do a little bit of the closeout. And if the panelists are okay, we can stay on like another 10 minutes if you want. What do you think, Brian?
That's fine. Let's do that.
Okay. So let me share my screen again, and well, Lisa, you can just talk about those last couple slides, and I'll put it up. Okay.
Yes. So if you really have this burning desire for more information about joint venture partnerships, There's a guidebook that was published by Enterprise and Supportive Housing Network in New York called Joint Venture Guidebook, a resource for developing affordable housing. So that's available. If you click on the link, you can download a copy of that. There are more webinars. The next webinar is December 2nd, and it's called Amp Up Your Career. Just, professional development options for asset and property managers. And so this is really about training, development, opportunities for career advancement. I know it's close to everyone's hearts, where you want to go in your career and the opportunities that are out there. So this is also collaboration with our partners at HAI Group. And on December 9th is Property Management Oversight Through the Asset Management Lens, which really kind of dovetails with this topic. So I encourage you all to stay tuned December 2nd and then December 9th. And then our online presence is available. The Cham Nuts and Bolts of Asset Management, you can do on your own now. You don't have to travel to DC or LA, or, you can save that money for your personal travel needs or for a new rowing machine or something. But anyway, the Cham Nuts and Bolts of Asset Management is online. And if you go to cham.us, you can find more details about that. I want to thank everyone. Julie can thank LISC and NEF, but I want to thank Malcolm and Harrison and Steve, and especially Brian, for a really important discussion. And I think it's really something that's to be continued. So Julie, I'm going to pass it back to you.
I am going to thank you, LISC and NEF, and pass it back to Brian to do our Q&A. We have like 90 people still here, as long as people want to stay on. If you do want to drop off, this will be recorded. So I say go for it.
All right, so I was looking at the Q&A and there were a couple of questions in there, and now they're no longer there. But I think one of them was, what's the best way to document a partnership, whether it's an operating agreement, a side letter, something to that effect. And I take the view is a binding document depends on where in the process you are. If you're brought in early, you're brought in late. Usually if we're brought in early and the deal terms aren't really fleshed out so much, we'll start with a binding LOI or a joint venture agreement. And then that leads in, once deals are more fleshed out, into an operating agreement. If it's, although that is, it does, cost a little bit, it takes a lot of time to do those various documents. Some people like to go straight to an operating agreement and work on that, but there's pros and cons to each approach, and certainly there's reasons to do one or the other. In terms of a side letter, I don't really like side letters. I don't prefer side letters because you want your negotiations, you want your documents to be known, right? Who are you hiding a side letter from? Most not-for-profits, successful ones, are out there, are known, are active, and so there's no need to do a side letter. If there are particular specific deal terms that you are trying to put in a side letter, maybe that's okay. But in general, the first document should be laying out most of your deal terms. Speaking of that, though, we have some time now. Hotly debated, negotiated JV terms. Steve was talking about earlier with the ROFR. Maybe uses that as leverage for something else. I think you also talked about major decisions. Can you talk about a little about what you negotiate and how you handle those specific issues?
It's interesting. The character of our deals with for-profits are probably a little bit more equally footed than our deals with other nonprofits. We typically come into our nonprofit joint venture partnerships as the experienced partner. An invitation from a nonprofit who has a parcel to develop, typically someone who has not done a project before. So there we are in a little bit more of we try to be the benevolent dictator, I guess is the word, but we try to point out that there are decisions that they will be able to participate in and make, and ones that we will insist upon. And I think I said earlier, the split was mostly the economic issues that put us at risk, who the investor will be, who the legal representation will be on the tax credit negotiation, who the general contractor will be, places that we are going to be exerting our guarantees, and our guarantees being most important. In the for-profit negotiations, we're finding a couple of different things. We're finding now, as I frankly age in place, I've been with the organization as its president for 25 years. We're starting to see some of our for-profit partners looking down the road 15 years and beginning to realize that I'm not there. And so we're now having more intricate discussions about whether I remain an officer or director of the corporation, because they feel comfortable with me, but they may or may not feel comfortable with my successor. And so there's some new nuances that come from folks basically saying, who are we negotiating our exit with? And I think those of us who do tax credits think about that when we select a tax credit investor, because there's some people with great reputations at year 15, Lisk Enterprise. There are some others who aren't such great reputations, and you begin to worry about year 15 and year 1. But the ROFR has certainly been one. And again, it's only available to the 501c3. And it has significant value. I mean, you know, it's as important as a negotiation as a developer fee. I mean, the amount of equity potentially in year 15 of these properties, and today, I mean, the cap rates are incredible for these. So we are willing to trade it to a certain degree, maybe for-profit partner doing 100% of the pre-development expenses. You know, and our typical deal, pre-development expenses are 500 to 700K. So it's a real number. We might do it in terms of a combination of factors, but I think it's probably the thing we want to hold on to the most, that people want to take away from us the most.
Good point. Malcolm, you know, on our pre-call, we were talking about how you've expanded your reach beyond your original catchment area. You started in Harlem, New York City, and now you've gone outside New York. How did you arrive at the decision? What kind of challenges are you facing now with that and kind of the benefits?
Thank you, Brian. In fact, our expansion activities is one of the true initiatives that I've started out as the president of HCCI about less than 5 years ago, and the reason is because the market in which HCCI was created, the New York City market, specifically the Harlem market, is crowded. You know, you made that point that, you know, the government, the New York City and state government doesn't really have a lot of properties on hand to distribute, and the model of HCCI at inception was, you know, working closely with the mayor's office, you know, the HPD, the HCR, to acquire properties through, you know the RFP process, and a lot of, particularly in the last economic crisis in 2008 or so, a lot of for-profit entities reinvented themselves and you know, off of Wall Street, and became real estate developers. And not only that, the for-profit entities that were focusing on market rate projects learned that there was value in affordable housing. So the market became very crowded, and you know, there's no more land being produced in New York City, and we don't think that they're going to rezone, you know, northern Manhattan for skyscrapers, and we couldn't compete in that market anyway, most likely. So we have to find other avenues and other jurisdictions for growth. And we've done it, one way we've done it is by expanding. But the other way we've accomplished that objective is by reinventing ourselves in the way we joint venture, and we're doing a lot more in order to fuel our growth. In addition to continuing to do development solely on our own, because right now we have about 5 real estate development projects we're doing as HCCI without partners, but we're also now partnering with developers in a nominee structure. So that part of that leveraging HCCI's experience and tax credits and history and likelihood to be approved for low-income housing tax credits, not only in New York City, but in other jurisdictions, because there's a prerequisite, right? And that prerequisite often says, and I'll use Georgia's the DCA, for an example. We now are developing a 400-unit project in Atlanta, Georgia. And that was because we introduced one of our New York for-profit entities and partners to one of our contractors who own property down there, right? And we brought that sort of partnership together. But the for-profit entity in New York didn't have enough LIHTC deals to qualify for DCA's allocation under their allocation plan. The only one in that group was HCCI that could achieve that DCA requirement. So we were able to negotiate our way into that project, in addition to, some other deals that we were working on with that particular for-profit partner. That really gives us a open into that particular market. Maybe we wouldn't have that opening, without that sort of historical experience in previous JV partnership. We've also been asked to come out and tutor some of the other houses of worship oriented group CBOs in other jurisdictions. So this past January, I was in Seattle, Washington, and that had been my 3rd trip to Seattle, Washington, because I'm advising a small group of CBOs on how to develop LIHTC projects out there. And Seattle has a vibrant housing market, but they don't really focus on the lower end CBOs. They're actually telling people, if you're not doing 400 units or above, we're not talking to you about a LIHTC deal. So, we're sort of, I'm personally talking to them and teaching them how to get those deals done. And we went to administrations in other cities. Like I met with Baltimore, Maryland's mayoral administration. Certainly have been in Newark, and we're prospecting now in Newark. But we also were able to leverage our relationship with J.P. Morgan Chase through their Common Impact technical assistance program. We applied for that that RFP, and we won. And we did a survey earlier this year, actually right when COVID hit, from March to June. We were working with J.P. Morgan to survey 9 cities throughout the United States that met our criteria at HCCI for entering into those markets. So some of those cities that we surveyed, Seattle, Washington, Jacksonville, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, Buffalo, Newark, Baltimore, Maryland, Washington, D.C. So we really have a quantitative analysis on and what our likelihood to enter those markets have been, and it's something that I presented to the board, and they gave me the go-ahead based on that sort of deep dive and third-party metrics in partnership with us to start to achieve some of those expansion goals. So we're we're actually in the midst of that expansion. We are now authorized to conduct business in the state of Georgia as HCCI. We have a certificate of authority, and we created a development entity, HCCI Northeast Developer, who also has a certificate of authority. We acquired 3 projects in Georgia already, and we're in this round for LIHTC, and it looks like we're going to get awarded for that new construction project of 400 units. And I'm meeting with the mayor's office next week, because I want to be respectful and introduce our organization to them and kind of say, kiss the ring, if you will, in that process, because it's important that you build relationships. And we actually, from the Northeast organization, we know how the dynamic is. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing and making sure that we are promising to work with local organizations, making sure that we promise that we're going to work with local contractors and that we're going to meet the goals that that administration wants and not just impose our style of development, from New York on anyone else.
Yeah, or certainly good luck with that. So I'll have one last question for Harrison. Harrison, for-profits, joint venture partners get bad reputations for coming in and just taking over and not having the not-for-profit partner have a say in certain decisions and how the project runs. How do you get not-for-profits comfortable with joint venturing with you and your team?
Well, I think, like I said, I think the first thing you do is you have a dialogue and you see what they want to do, what they're trying to achieve, and your interests have got to be aligned. So, I go back to the example that with HTCI, they're determined to develop affordable housing just as we are. So our interests are aligned. So now it's how do we go down the road? There are a lot of quote unquote bad actors out there, but I think that there are some mutually beneficial nonprofit relationships you can have. In New York City, when you're trying to fill up your properties, they can help you with lottery, community outreach, finding MWBEs for construction purposes. So I try to figure out what a nonprofit can fill the gaps for us in. And, I go back to saying, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And, it's like a marriage or a certain component of a marriage where everyone has to get something out of it, right? So it just in a nonprofit, for-profit JV scenario or a for-profit JV scenario, everyone has to get something out of it. It's got to be mutually beneficial and your interests have got to be aligned.
Brian, let me just add one note and I'll be short. In this business, scale matters. And so joint ventures, I think to a certain degree, helps with scale, helps with guarantees, et cetera. Make sure, I think the biggest word of warning to the nonprofit meeting with a for-profit is make sure that you materially participate in the project. In our state, we rarely see for-profits competing with, doing joint ventures with nonprofit unless it qualifies them for the nonprofit set aside. So the motivation is purely economic. And there are circumstances in which the for-profit is really seeking that nonprofit who will least materially participate, who will simply take a check and sit quietly. And I think be careful of what that approach is, because there are choices. I mean, one of our current deals came because basically someone said, hey, this is the joint venture offered to us by a for-profit. Is it a good deal or a bad deal? And we said, not a particularly good deal. They're offering you less than what the state requires. And they said, well, can you improve upon it? So there's opportunities to do both well. I think just make sure that it's a material participation.
That's a great point.
Thank you,
Great.
Steve. Yeah, that's a great point. We need to go now, but thank you all for hanging in there and to be continued.
Yeah, thank you for having us and thank you to
All
the panelists and we'll be talking soon.
right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.